Hey, and welcome back to the number one podcast in the sport that is excitedly expecting Chris Eubank and Conor Benn to deliver an absolute exhibition. Let me stop with the egg analogies, but you get the point. Been an interesting few days in boxing, hasn't it? You know, the sport that never fails to entertain, that's for absolute certain. So just want to keep this one relatively brief. Let's talk a bit about the weekend that was and the press conference that was as well. I think now that we've all had a few days to reflect on Saturday, I think we all have that feeling of that was a really good card, but that wasn't the card that was sold to us. You know, like when Hearn was like, this is the greatest card of all time. You know, we will never see a card like it again, this, that, and the third. And it was never that to begin with. It was always a really good card. It was always a top tier card. And it was a card I believe fans deserved as a default, but it was never a game-changing card. Now, you see, we knew that as soon as a couple of fights fell off and we're just like, oh my God, this isn't great. And so I always go back to this question. Remember when Eddie Hearn said, whenever I've got big fights, I always make sure there's someone spare. There was no one spare. There was no one spare. There was no one who was like, let me stay on weight just in case. There was no viable option, right? And so that impacts the card. And you're like, okay, cool. We're okay with that. We can live with that. But the point is, that's one of those cards that it was sold as a 10 out of 10 card, but even the day it was released, it was probably an 8.5 out of 10 card. And that's because it didn't have the star power. So, for example, if you had flipped out one of those fights for, I don't even know, like a Joyce versus White, and people say, oh, they're both shot, but in terms of name brand, it would help elevate. But we're splitting hairs here. It was a good card. Not one you'd want to have paid for, but in this current climate, you can understand why you'd have to. But look, let's just dive into the fights. Quick summaries of what happened and, you know, what we can expect. So let's to start off with, I'm not even going to ask where Brad Rear was. It was always strange that name was on the card. And to see him removed and replaced with a couple of local fighters was good. I think they built Joe Gallagher trained. So there's one young kid who was Zayad and one called Alakel. I might be wrong on that. Apologies if I got the names wrong. So I like what both guys do. I'm gonna lump them together because I feel the same way about both. When you watch them, and if you watch them without any sound, turn the sound off and watch how they box, and you go, these guys are really good. Really, really competent guys. Technically proficient. Everything they do looks correct. It looks good. But you see, when you turn the sound off, what you're really looking for is a reaction from the opponent. And they weren't able to do that. And I don't know why. I don't know if they're not physically capable, or it's just like it's not a mentality thing. I don't know what it is, but that's the missing piece from those guys. And maybe Saudi Arabian boxing needs less of the Mike Tyson gym and all the glitz and glamour that comes with it, and more outreach. Because the kids who will take Saudi Arabian boxing to another level are somewhere in that country, but you've got to go digging. You've got to go digging for the right raw materials. And this is true in every sport. Like, I talk to friends of mine who work in rugby, and I just say, if I was picking youth rugby players for the future, I'd be in Croydon, I'd be in Lambeth, and I'd be in Lewisham all day, 24/7, hoovering up kids, saying, look, we'll give you a scholarship to Whitgift, we'll give you a scholarship to St. John's, we'll give you a scholarship to Oakham, wherever you want to go, we'll give you a scholarship, just play rugby, please. And I'll do that, and that'll be my long-term project, because you would have the perfect raw materials for what English rugby needs. Football clubs have been doing this for a long time. They sussed it out. And so Saudi Arabia needs to work out, where are the best raw materials in that country? Where are the people who are naturally strong with good musculature and who've had to overcome so much that for them, boxing is their only way out? It all felt a bit nice when I was watching the two lads box. It all felt a bit nice. Like kids who had learned to box, but if they don't box, they could go off and become something else. Now, I might be wrong on that, but that's just the vibe it gave me. So to see them pick up wins, I said, okay, cool, but what's your real level? And the answer is we won't know until someone comes in to take their heads off. But if you want to showcase a Saudi boxing style and how Saudi boxers are going to look going forward, I think what we saw over the weekend was a pretty good start point. So bear with me. I'm just going to jump around the fights as I remember them and not necessarily in the order that they were watched. So I want to talk about Jile Jiang versus Agit Kabayel. Jile Jiang is the human equivalent of the yin and the yang, isn't he? That's how I describe him. He is the yin and the yang. The first half of any Jile Jiang fight, you go, oh my God, this guy is a monster. This guy he's a wrecking machine. He's unbeatable. He's this, he's that. And then that just switches off. It's not even like it doesn't even decline. After about 3 rounds, it just switches off. Like Super Jiang just disappears completely. And then it's like old man approaching middle-aged Jiang that shows up. And it's weird, isn't it? It's like the Incredible Hulk. You know, like Jile Jiang goes from Hulk to Bruce Banner. And you're like, huh? I don't even know if the Hulk's actually real name is Bruce Banner. I just always say Bruce Banner because it can't be David Banner. But I watch Jiang and I go, I don't think in one guy's career over a consistent number of fights, I don't think I've seen somebody be so different in such a short space of time. Like, it's almost like he does no cardio. That's how I look at it. I'm like, mate, do you even run? Do you do any cardio? Because that shouldn't happen. Because look at the early part of that fight. Okay, Kabayel's getting to him, but you saw with Jiang that when Jiang hits, it has an effect. So you're like, okay, it's just a matter of time. And then he drops him. And you're like, okay, that's a 10-8 round. That kind of flips the scorecards, towards him a bit, And then you looked at that, you go, he could do that again. And so that was the problem for me. I was like, he could do that again. And then just as soon as you get your hopes up, Super Jiang's gone. And then normal Jiang's there, and normal Jiang cannot take a body shot. And Agit Kabayel is the master of that. And you have to give Kabayel credit, because what Kabayel has clearly sussed out is heavyweights don't train to take body shots. And therefore, that is the delta. He is rapidly, along with Richard Torres Jr., becoming one of the best body punchers in the heavyweight division that we've seen in a while. Probably the last good guy in that sense was Andy Ruiz, but we don't really see him that much anymore. But Kabayel he's 6'3", he's got some weight behind him, he's about 17 stone, and he's doing that. And if you follow my pod for long enough, he's doing exactly what I said heavyweight should do. And I think I said this. The future of the heavyweight division is going to move back to these smaller guys, 6'4" and down, that can combine a high work rate with a bit of size and strength. And that's what Kabayel's bringing. And we'll talk about it later, but it wouldn't surprise me to see him in an absolute tear-up with Joseph Parker. Because, Kabayel's a bit more rounded than Parker, but size-wise they match up nicely. Physical capabilities they seem to match up nicely, and they're both quite tough guys. So I think that would be a good fight. But watching him break Jiang down with those body shots, and you're like, why can't Jiang take body shots? Like, come on, man. Like, don't you train? This is, when people laugh at body sparring, this is one of the things body sparring guarantees. It guarantees that when your body is strafed with incoming fire and it's bruised up, and anyone that's body sparred properly round after round knows, you go home and everything's tender. Sometimes you're just bruised up. But after about 2 months or so, that doesn't happen anymore. Your body's just conditioned to it. That's the value of body sparring. And when you do it properly, not this kind of clown stuff you see in a lot of gyms, but when you do it properly, it's valuable. And Jiang paid a heavy price for clearly not doing it. But I think those two guys, and if you look at Jiang now, you still want him to fight because he gives you that thing, which is he might knock someone out. So do you give him the loser of Joe Joyce versus Dillian White? Do you give him the winner of that? And then just go, right, mate, go and fight in England and go and entertain. I think Kabayel's headed towards, as things stand, he's headed towards an Usyk fight at some point. Because it's compelling. I'm not saying he's going to beat him, but you are asking that question, what if he gets to Usyk's body? Because Usyk has seemed troubled by body shots, so as is Joshua. And maybe that's why Joshua has actively avoided mentioning Kabayel. I don't know. But Kabayel's in the ascendancy. Good luck to him. I like seeing that because if everyone remembers, he fought Chisora and stunk it out. And so to have this kind of redemption arc he's going through at the moment where the fans love him, kudos to him, and I wish him all the best. How much do you want me to talk about Shakur Stevenson versus Liam Padley? Liam or Josh? I have no idea. The Floyd Schofield fight didn't make sense for Shakur Stevenson for a start. And it's standard Eddie Hearn matchmaking. This is why he ruins everybody that comes to Matchroom, right? Shakur Stevenson needs to be tested because the fights he's lining himself up for are going to be real tests. So being in the ring with a Floyd Schofield does nothing for him. Being in the ring with the Pitbull Cruz would do something for him. Do you see what I mean? Yet these are never the routes that he chooses to take. And yes, I get it. He wants to show off his skills and stuff, and he's trying to make as much money for as little risk as possible. And Hearn facilitates this every time, doesn't he? Like, he does this. He puts people in with guys who are over the hill. Like, I was almost surprised they didn't dig up Linares. When I heard Schofield was out, I was like, God, they'll dig up Linares, won't they? You know what I mean? They'll dig up Linares or they'll dig up Ricky Burns. I could see it. But they dig up the young kid Padley, who I think I said before, I love his fan base. Well, one in particular, let's say. And people are going to say he was brave, and I get it. He was, because he was in there with someone who, in theory, is light years ahead of him. But it was this weird fight because after about 30 seconds, Shakur Stevenson realized there was no prospect of him losing the fight. And he almost seemed to just drift out of fight or flight mode into sparring mode. Just work on some things. When he goes, he goes. I genuinely think if someone had said, Shakur, you got 5 rounds to get this done, he would have got it done in 5. But instead, he kind of coasted through the fight, putting on a clinic. Okay, there were no power shots, but it was a clinic. Padley was super brave and super courageous to hang in there and get some of his offense off as well. So he showed that he's not poor. And let's not forget, he beat Mark Chamberlain. So that puts him at a good level in this country. But he's limited. You know, he's all heart and guts. You know, it's not a highly intelligent style that he's got, which is fine. But he was super brave, man. He took 3 pretty nasty body shots, kept getting up. Didn't need to. Already had his money. But his pride said, I need to keep standing up. And we don't have enough of that in the sport. And so he should be back on a Riyadh season card. Give him the Mark Chamberlain rematch. And, you know, let him make some good money off that. And then can entertain the fans. As for Shakur Stevenson, I don't know what you do. I think you start putting him in with guys that are going to give him problems. Like, don't be warming up Oscar Valdez or Navarrete and bringing them up in weight. No. Let him fight people within his own domain. Shakur Stevenson versus Keyshawn Davis should be the only fight people are talking about at 135. Right? That's the fight. Because there's a kid here in Keyshawn Davis that's already a world champion in like next to no time. And looked mean and nasty doing it. Whereas you got Shakur, who's... And I think Shakur Stevenson is very talented. Unbelievably talented. But we want to see him tested. Like, you don't win the hearts of the fans by being good. You win the hearts of the fans by being tested and overcoming that. And we're yet to see that from Shakur, and we do need to see that. So I found the Virgil Ortiz Jr. versus Israel Madrimov fight fascinating for a number of reasons. One, it was a chance to assess where Crawford really is as he moves up in weight. Because there was a time when Ortiz and Crawford were meant to fight at 147, and somehow that didn't happen for whatever reason. Maybe money, other things. Does Crawford really need that kind of work at this point in his career? Probably not. So we saw that Crawford struggled a bit with Madrimov. Or no, let's rephrase that. Madrimov performed better than expected against Crawford. And so that helped build his name up. And when it came to this fight, we had expectations of a similar kind of Madrimov. A guy who would bring real physicality. But the early part of the fight was surprising because he was very loose, he was I don't want to say slick, because I think you're slick when you're under fire, but he was very slick in the wrong places. He's very slick when there's no danger. But as soon as Ortiz got where he wanted to be, and Ortiz's footwork is deceptively good. Deceptively good. There's no flair to what he does. It's just all grounded in really good fundamentals. He's got a feel of that Miguel Cotto to him, whereby it's just consistent. His shape is consistent. You can have him moving around the ring, hit pause. He looks pretty much identical in all situations. And so he doesn't give you many tells. And what he was able to do was just keep that space tight on Madrimov and then just let the combinations go, knowing that you can't evade 4 punches. And then as he started to realize what was working, round after round, he started to add some real finesse and precision to the punches and start targeting common areas. The body was targeted to the same place every time. And you can see that was taking its toll on Madrimov, who you got to give credit to, because he overcame a lot of adversity in order to fight back. And strange enough, there were people who thought Madrimov won. And I don't know what they were watching. And this is what I've learned now. When you're a fan of boxing from the perspective of you've always watched it, you've trained your eye into certain things, and it's normally shaped by what commentators tell you or what you pick up in the media. That's what shapes your thinking, because there's nothing else. When you've been in the sport and you've had an opportunity to try things and see what works and what doesn't work, and you know the consequences of getting things wrong, you look for different things. So you start by looking at the building blocks. Who's got the better building blocks? And then you go, okay, who's using those building blocks better? Who's built the better structure in this fight than the other guy? That's how it's normally easy for me to determine who wins a fight. Like all the other stuff like punch count, it's all for the birds, man. It's window dressing. It's really about that block of fundamentals and who applies it creatively and who imposes their will on the encounter. And I just felt Ortiz, not that he was comfortable, but that fight was more comfortable than it should have been. It was more comfortable than the hype had us believe it would be. And I think Ortiz is a problem for most people because of that work rate he puts through. If you fight someone like Virgil Ortiz, you got to hurt them early. You got to hurt them early. And even then, you're not hurting to discourage, you're hurting to deplete and hope that after round 8, it gets easier for you. And there's no guarantee that's the case. And just to reinforce this point, that's another golden boy product. The machine never fails to deliver. I don't think there's a promotional company right now, maybe Top Rank at a push, that knows how to develop fighters in that really structured and scientific way, because you look at him and you go, okay, he might get tagged a few times, but he doesn't even get smashed to bits. Like, he can catch the shots when he needs to and fire straight back. And it's always going to be my bugbear that we don't have that in this country. We don't have those capabilities in this country, and that worries me greatly. And I don't know how we fix that. But in terms of Madrimov, he's shown that, and that kind of top tier, he's the gatekeeper to that without being a name in that mix. He's that gatekeeper to it. If you really want to be somebody at 154, you fight him. But it is making me rethink the Crawford fight and go, okay, if Crawford gave that performance at 154, what's he going to give it at 168? Because I believe Jamel Charlo would have had an easier time against Madrimov than Crawford did. And when Jamel Charlo went to 168, he was forced to play nice with Canelo and hope Canelo took it easy on him. I will say this though. The Hamza Sheeraz fight, Carlos Adames fight, it went exactly how I thought it would go. I don't take any joy in that. I think you've known that I've had a line of thought for a long time that we don't toughen our fighters up in this country. And so they go to these other environments and they're half cooked. I believe Adames has been toughened up way before he even got to world level. And that was the difference between the two. Adames showed that he could work his way into a fight despite taking a lot of incoming early on. And Sheeraz showed he couldn't turn a fight. And I know people say he broke his hand. Okay, but that doesn't excuse the tactical issues. Yeah, okay, you can't land your right hand, so you're not going to get him out of there. Fine. But you can still score points with it because you were throwing your right hand. But tactically, it looked like you didn't know what you wanted to do. You're 6'3", you got long arms, and yes, you try and keep it long, but your feet are too slow. That was the issue. The feet weren't fast enough for someone like Adames, who, for all of his limitations, was quite springy as he warmed into the fight. And what he was able to do was just start grinding Hamza Sheeraz down. And I don't think he didn't do anything more than just have an iron will and say, I'm not going to be dominated by Hamza Sheeraz. He had that mindset of, I'm not believing the hype. I'm in this ring with you right now, and I'm not believing the hype. You are not worthy of my belt, and I'm going to show you. And so he did. And I thought Sheeraz struggled to turn the psychology of the fight in his favor. He couldn't find that moment he needed to give him belief that he could win. And he boxed the last third of the fight, in my opinion, like he was just happy to see it through. He was like, this ain't my day today. Come back another day. If I can scrape a draw, I'll be happy. That was the body language he gave through that fight, in my opinion. And so that makes the scorecards absolutely ridiculous. 115, 114 to Hamza Sheeraz, God knows how. 118, 110 to Adames, God knows how. And 114, 114 for a majority draw. Although weirdly enough, Barry McGuigan had it 118, 112. I couldn't do the maths behind that, but it suggested there were a lot of non-committal rounds from him. But I think if we look at that fight overall, the judging, and we should be very balanced in this, guys, yeah? Because we notice really bad judging because normally it's spot on. Yeah? We forget that. We notice bad judging because it's normally spot on. Like, you can get 1,000 fights happen, there'll be 3 where you're like, oh my God, what the hell was that judge thinking? That's a good strike rate. Like, look at Premier League referees. Every game, there's an issue. So, tip your hat off to what these judges do, but when there's a world title on the line, there should at least be a closer consensus. If they're judging the same things, there should be a broad consensus with some variation depending on which angle you get. I understand that, but that just looked, like I say, like it's almost like some people given a scorecard already and said, that's the scorecard you're going to present. And so it proved. Now, what does this mean for Hamza Sheeraz? There's a lot of talk about him moving up in weight. He struggled to make the weight, and I can believe that, by the way. How he makes middleweight is beyond me, but I can believe that he is better suited at 168. But then my question is, what's he going to do at 168? Who's there for him that can make him money at 168? Are you going to start bringing guys down? So you got to now bring guys like Zach Parker down in weight, etc., etc. Is that the way we're going? Or are we saying he's got to fight Callum Simpson? A guy who really, this time last week, Hamza Sheeraz wasn't in the same stratosphere as Callum Simpson. So where do we go? The answer is I don't know. I think Sheeraz is a talent looking for a natural rival, and I don't think he's found that yet. Maybe you rebuild him by pushing Heaney up to 168 and having Hamza Sheeraz jumping with Nathan Heaney. I don't know. I think this is that kind of retreat. Sometimes the hype cycle has to dip a bit so we get a more realistic view on a boxer. I think that's where we are with Hamza Sheeraz. In terms of Carlos Adames, where do you go now? Do you fight Janibek? I'm going to say this. Denzel Bentley against Adames is a better fight than Sheeraz was, because I believe Denzel's been through that process of having to be a dog, having to come back multiple times. So if they can make that fight happen, Bentley versus Adames, why not? I don't know what the ranking situation is, but there's no other viable option. The money's going to be in the UK for the fight anyway. Why not do that? Let Denzel fight for a world title with sufficient prep. I think he's deserved that, in my opinion. But that's what I'd say on that fight. Compelling fight to an extent, but that kind of scoring makes you wonder what boxing really is. And let's not forget those video clip of Turkey telling Hamza Sheeraz he might be 2 rounds down, etc. in principle, I have nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with that, but the optics are bad, aren't they? Like when you see the guy who's bankrolling boxing, talking to a guy that he's named as a Riyadh season ambassador, who's in a very hard fight, and he's in that corner, it points to I need to protect my asset. And so my natural concern is, are we playing fair? And that's going to be a very hard thing to establish. But the optics of it weren't good. I'm not saying that there was cheating or foul play. I'm just saying when you look, it looked like the whole machine was in one corner and the other guy was just here to hand the belt over. And he refused to do so. So let's talk about Parker versus Boli. Disaster on top of disaster on top of disaster on top of disaster on top of disaster. There's a concerted effort, isn't there? And I don't know if it's one party or multiple parties to basically destroy Boxer. That's what we're seeing. We're seeing this concerted effort to destroy Boxer, one fighter at a time. Take away all the value they have and just render them irrelevant. Now, I don't know why that is. Is it because Ben isn't perceived to have fought his way up the ladder? I don't know. But yeah, it seems to be that, like, we're going to put all the Boxer guys in difficult situations. If they overcome them, cool, we'll do it again. You know, so you got to run the gauntlet. And that seems to be the case with Boli. So here's what I do know. No one expected Dubois to box. Right? That's what I can say. No one expected it. Now, the whys in the hows, I'd be breaching confidence to say stuff. But he wasn't. But he was there because you're still trying to get the last pay-per-view buys and make it credible, etc. But if you're clued up, you would notice in the fight week, they weren't making a big deal about Daniel Dubois. There wasn't the energy they should have been, which is, look, this guy's one fight away from that rematch with Usyk. We're going to make a whole load of money. This is going to happen at Wembley. We might have Joshua Wilder on the undercard as a little co-main event. And these two, the winners go at it, the losers go at it. All this stuff that you should be doing to really make people go, I want to see this fight. Show me. Take my money, right? That's what you should be doing. But it was subdued. And I was expecting that because Dubois wasn't going to fight. And at that point, they've made phone calls, right? So they've gone, well, what are our options right now? And they're looking around. So you obviously start in the UK. You look at someone like a Joe Joyce, and apparently Joe's not ready. He's not into the meaty part of camp. So it was like, thanks, but no thanks. But he did get a call. I don't think Dillian got the call. Derek was asked, but I think he's still got to recover from the camp and the fight with Wilder. People just think about the fight, but it's also the camp. And also Derek's the wrong side of 40 now. So you've got to be delicate with that. But Chisora would have hoovered up that money. And then they looked at rejigging Kabayel versus Jiang. So does one of those guys fight? And it would have probably been Kabayel versus Parker. But they didn't feel that they could find a strong enough replacement who would make sense for Jiang. Although weirdly enough, it turns out actually Boli versus Jiang would have been good because they both had about 3 rounds in them. Do you know what I mean? So they ended up with Boli. Now, we're just saying, I think Billy Nelson threw his hat in the ring and said Martin will do it. And any number of reasons are being speculated on. And one of them is that I think Boli's in the hole to Billy Nelson so much that Billy's like, I just need to get my money now. So that we're not in a relationship based on you owe me. And it's, I've made my money, now let's make money together. So I think that was some of the subtext to it. Because Boli hasn't been sparring. You heard it in the fight. Billy said you've been doing no sparring. And look, I'll tell you now, yeah, I'm the king of ticking over in the gym, okay? I am the king of ticking over. Headphones in, put some Nipsey Hussle in, go on the treadmill, 25 to 35 minutes on that treadmill, you know, get my Quincy Watts on, zoop, 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 zoop. Do a bit of skipping, 5-6 rounds of skipping, shadow box for a bit, and then do 12 rounds on the bag, right? Bit of conditioning to finish off, and that's my session done. That's ticking over. That doesn't prepare you for jumping in with Joe Parker, who's done a dedicated and focused camp. It just doesn't. No, it doesn't. It's dangerous to put them in there. And so when we talk about levels, this is what we mean by levels in boxing. Martin Buatti is probably more talented than Joseph Parker as a technician, right? And has probably delivered more impressive performances, in my opinion. But a Martin Buatti who's essentially on the beach is light years away from a Joseph Parker that's been in camp. So let's look at the fight. Buatti comes in, the adrenaline's firing up, so he's redlining his body just to look good in the first round because that's your adrenaline. And he's able to hit Parker, and Parker's just gone, Jesus Christ, I hope he doesn't have 12 rounds of this in him because I can't take it. Parker looked uncomfortable every time he got hit. And so second round, you can see Joseph Parker's going, I just got to stick it on him. Like, the best way to not get hurt here is to stick it on him and know that he'll get tired quick. And as soon as he detected that tiredness, just started trying shots. And the shot he landed with was kind of Buatti falling into it, which is why it hit the top of the head. So he fell into it as it landed, completely messed up his equilibrium, and that was him gone. It wouldn't have been safe for him to carry on. So I understand why he didn't. But nothing screams fast more than Martin Buatti in a pair of shorts that would have been tight on Sandy Ryan and a pair of gloves that were Daniel Dubois. And you're looking at that going, wow, like they really haven't thought this through. You flew economy, no one's even chartered a jet for you to come over. Despite what they're paying you, they haven't got the 10 grand or 15 grand to get a private jet over. Right? It was all just a bit rinky-dink and embarrassing. And I felt for Buatti because he came into the hotel and they made him do media when it's like, mate, just let him go and get some sleep. He can weigh in when he wakes up. It's not like there's an issue with the weight, is there? But he comes in, gets in at 3:15. He's probably wired anyway. He probably hasn't slept. He's just gone, right, I'm going to go through hell to get this money and go. Because I can tell you for absolute certain, the first 4 days he was in Congo, that man was on the sesh. Yeah, he had that I'm on a sesh belly. You know when you're just there and you're just eating grilled meat. Yeah, eating grilled meat with a bottle of Hennessy, no mixer. Just eating grilled meat, bit of salt, Hennessy. Grilled meat, bit of salt, Hennessy. And that's what he was probably doing for 4 days. They're like, mate, you got to come out and box. And he's gone, damn. Then they showed him the money. He's like, yeah, secure that bag. So credit to him for getting the money. But that guy is not fighting FA Jagba. It's not safe for him to do so. Like, that fight just has to get canned. Right? Let someone else have that opportunity. In fact, if Jared Anderson is so confident about who he is now, let him fight FAF Jagba. Let's see what he's got. But that was a fast. That was a black mark on boxing. If it hadn't been for money, would Billy Nelson have taken that? I don't think he would have done. And so you got to ask yourself, does he have Martin's health and best interest at heart? I can't answer that, but it's not great. And because he's on the other side of the line, I don't think Queensbury or Matchroom really care about helping him out. So we'll see what Buatti does. But that's a real shame because they just killed Buatti's momentum. That fight just killed his momentum. And it's made Joe Parker look like this killer when really Joe Parker's he's just the champion of the infirm, isn't he? He's like the infirmary world champion. Just people who are either old or past their sell-by day. And Parker's now coming in and hoovering up. I'm not going to be impressed with this guy. This is a guy, let's not forget, that got dropped by Dillian White and was hanging on for dear life against Dillian White. This is the guy against Anthony Joshua who had no clue how to get to him. This is the guy who got lucky against Andy Ruiz. This is the guy who got super lucky against Hughie Fury. And we know what Hughie's gone on to do. So no one can ever tell me Joseph Parker's world level because he's shown us time after time he's anything but world level. He's a good fighter, by the way. Yeah. But he's not world level. And if he is, then boxing's finishing because then the standards aren't that high. Because Joseph Parker is just a guy that Andy Lee said, just throw straight punches and get some work rate in. And obviously the work with Dr. Oz is paying dividends. Why doesn't anyone talk about that? Why does no one in the boxing media talk about his relationship with Dr. Uz. That seems to have carried on longer than Conor Benn's. Conor Benn's relationship with Dr. Uz lasted 8 weeks. Joseph Parker's seemingly has lasted 3 or 4 years. So when are people going to start pointing at Joseph Parker going, why are you still cool with Dr. Uz? When? Yeah? All these people with their cameras and whatnot. When do people just go at Joseph Parker, whatever his name is, Joe Boxer Parker, at him, mate, why are you still knocking around with Dr. Uz? Is he supplying you with stuff? Just get on with it. But it leaves a bad taste. Joe Parker is not what people say he is. And as soon as you put him in with someone like a Daniel Dubois, or anyone who's hungry, even a Fabio Wardley, he'll get knocked bandy. I just think he will. Because, Jack Massey showed that Joe Parker's no monster. So now we can come to the 2 fights that actually saved the card and made this card actually really enjoyable. Callum Smith versus Joshua Buatti. Well. You're only trying to be diplomatic, but your heart's telling you to say what you feel, and you're like, I've always thought Joshua Buatti's career was a bit of a Ponzi scheme. I'm going to explain to you why. When you look through Josh's record and the fights that you kind of attach his reputation to, they're all against guys that were in awe of him. And I don't mean like deferentially, but Josh was the best kid of his generation in the amateurs, right? So people looked up to Josh. And when Josh won the Olympic bronze, people still looked up to him because, that's Josh. Yeah. And then when he got the Matchroom deal and he was rising fast, people were looking at Josh going, that's the standard bearer. So when he's fighting guys like Dan Aziz and he's fighting guys like Craig Richards, he knows they looked up to him at one point. So psychologically, he always had that edge where he was their problem, they weren't his problem. He was destined for things bigger than they were. And he's boxed that way, and he's positioned himself that way, and he's behaved that way. And, has it got to his head? Despite the media stuff, I think it has, but that's just my opinion. In Callum Smith, he had a guy who didn't care about any of his accolades. Because Callum's like, you were watching me. You saw my rise. You were impressed with my rise. You know what I do. You were a novice pro when I was winning the World Boxing Super Series, right? That's Callum Smith. So Callum's like, I'm here so you guys can respect me and understand that I was always the man at 168 and 175. And so that's really what this is. Joshua Buatti had to go out and earn Callum's respect. He already had Dan's respect. He already had Craig's respect and all those other guys that he's fought. He had their respect because they looked at him and went, he's achieved a lot. Callum Smith was like, so have I. And I've banked the money. And so you have that. And then add in that Buddy McGirt's had a good look at Joshua Buatti this time. And he got to see how his ideas would fare already. So this was like his do-over. He had a second chance to make a good impression. And so it proved. The theme of the fight was how dexterous Callum Smith's left hand is. Now, I don't know if Callum's left-handed. I should ask Joe. But he boxed like he was a left-handed orthodox because his hand was so dexterous. He was finding every gap on Joshua Buatti's right-hand side. Like, there was a beautiful sequence where I think he's gone like jab into a left uppercut into a left hook. But what he did with his left hook, which was nice, is he turned it over so it was palm down. And that meant that it got right in that elbow crook. That normally, like, if you have it in the neutral grip, you're just going to hit the arm. But he's gone right through the gap and just got Josh. And Josh has gone, oh my God, this guy knows what he's doing. And that was the theme of the night. Josh just couldn't see that left hook. And what Callum does with it, and I think this is definitely an influence from Buddy, Callum fully rotates into these shots. So his shoulders are turning. He's getting every last degree of leverage out of that punch when he throws it. And the same on the right-hand side. And I love this. To create the lane for the left hook, he made sure he threw loads of right uppercuts to keep Josh's guard tight so he could come around the side. And Josh had no answer to this because Josh has no mobility. Joshua Buatti is not a guy that moves around the ring. And so Callum said, I don't need to move around. I'm older now. Sod it. Even though I'm the taller guy, we can war on the inside. I'm comfortable doing that. And you saw Callum box with hunger, and he boxed with desire, and he boxed with that intent to say, no, 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 we're going to have it out today. I'm going to show that I am the best in this country. And I loved watching that. And you got to give Callum credit too, because Josh was coming back with some mean shots, some nasty shots. When he could just get a bit of flow into what he was doing, he was hurting Callum, and Callum was like, no, I will not be denied. So I enjoyed that. From the Josh side, he stands too square, he's too static. He holds his hips too high, so he's not really anchored to the canvas either when he throws those shots. And if you notice, it takes Josh that first shot to start setting up like that momentum to throw the other shots. He can't just flow into a single shot, so he always has to throw in combinations to get the momentum, just like sort of rolling the snowball down the hill. And that normally works against people because they cover up and wait for the storm to end, which it doesn't. Whereas Callum will hit you while you're punching. And so it was a bit harder. And if you notice that because Josh stands square, he doesn't get full extension into his shots either. So he's leaving a lot of power on the table. And that at the top level, that catches up to you. You got to remember that Callum Smith's his biggest fight. He hasn't fought a decent Kovalev. He hasn't fought a prime Beterbiev. He hasn't been in those places someone like Anthony Yard has. He hasn't been in those places someone like a Lyndon Arthur has. He hasn't been in those places someone like a Craig Richards has, where they've been in with top tier guys and look competitive. Like Callum Smith isn't Bivol level. He's above the Brits at the moment, but he's somewhere below the two Russians. And so, having seen that fight, you almost say, right, what do you do with Callum Smith now? I think if Beterbiev retires, and we can talk about that later, I think he fights Bivol. You can make that happen in the UK, and that'll be a big deal. In terms of Josh, for now, I'd like to see Josh in some fights against like-minded people. So him in with like a Jesse Hart, him with an Alexander Gavodchik, guys who will give him those kinds of rounds where he can look better. But I think what we've realized is he's some way off being top tier, and maybe that's why Hearn's not so bitter about losing him now. So that brings us to the main event. I think the main event was interesting, but it doesn't really require a lot of depth because kind of what you saw was what it was. It's a continuation of the first fight with two key adjustments. I think for me, Beterbiev realized that he left it too late in the first fight to really stamp his authority. So he was looking to do that a lot earlier. And I think Bivol realized actually by him using his legs so much in the first fight, two things happened. One, he gave Beterbiev a target to chase, which he loves because he's so good at cutting the ring off. And it also helped tire him out down the stretch. And so they made the right adjustments. Bivol said, actually, I'm going to stay a lot closer to you this time. And when you let shots off, I'm going to let shots off. And we're going to see who throws more. And so I really enjoyed that dynamic of Beterbiev going, he's not moving around so much. And so now Beterbiev's like, I'm going to have to fight in the pocket, which I'm not used to. If you look at the punches Beterbiev throws, the jab, backhand, jab, kind of right hook, left hook, they're not what I call inside combinations that he can throw. Whereas Bivol's just going to be Bivol at close range, just throw loads of punches, but he can come around the side a lot easier than Beterbiev can. So he can afford to do that on the inside. And so that was the kind of the tactical chess game. Now the physical chess game was Bivol building up a little bit of a lead, then Beterbiev having that surge from like 3 to 7. He had this huge surge where he just grabbed control of the fight. Probably, up until the end of round 6, definitely, part of round 7, and then he seemed to tail off. And Bivol sensed that. And then Bivol said, if I can just hang in while he's declining, maybe I can force a gap. And then you see Beterbiev kind of grab himself together and pull through. And I'll always maintain if these two fight, I'll always give it to Beterbiev because I feel it takes more for Beterbiev. So let me rephrase that. It takes more for Bivol to survive these fights than it does Beterbiev. And I know that's not strictly speaking a scoring dimension, but I watch it and I go, those punches Beterbiev throws have a greater impact punch for punch than the ones Bivol throws. So how many punches does Bivol have to throw to get the equivalent level of damage and tactical control, which I don't think he had. I felt in the second fight, Bivol was reactive, and I don't feel he imposed himself the way that he could have done. It's my opinion. And others will see the fight differently. Listen, if you see the fight differently, that's fine. You didn't judge it, and I didn't judge it. We just have different views on it. But I can understand the argument for Beterbiev winning the second fight. I kind of lean that way, but I'm probably biased towards that style of boxing. But I can also understand people saying, well, actually, I think Bivol won that. And fair enough. I'm comfortable with both sides of that. I'm glad that they were able to box at a higher level this time. I think the first fight was more entertaining. I think the second one was them locking in. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Bivol's kind of still in his peak, and you can see that Beterbiev's declining because he can't let the shots go that he used to let go. I love it when my phone goes off when I'm recording. It's going to be boxing related, but no, I'll call them back. There you go. Bit of a live window into what I go through when I record. So if we just come back to what we're talking about here. When you're picking a winner, it's really about what you like, because I like what Beterbiev does, people like what Bivol does, but I just feel Bivol has to work a lot harder in these fights than Beterbiev does. And like we were saying earlier, because Beterbiev's getting older, he hasn't got the work rate he had against someone like Callum Smith or even Anthony Yard. He hasn't got that work rate. And so I don't see him getting that back. And if they fight a third time, then I think you'll see clear water between Bivol and Beterbiev. And what's the point of that? Like, we want the fights to be competitive. Bivol's age-wise at a time where you want to wonder, do you need to spend more time with your children? And I'd understand him saying yes to that. It makes perfect sense. So that would be my interpretation of the fight. Like I said, I can't argue with you over your opinion because it's your opinion. This is just what I saw. And yeah, that's what I'd say. And I know I could be really deep and talk about the footprint, but we've seen the first fight already. This was kind of an extension of that. And it was worth watching, but I don't know if I want to see it a third time, And I think as fans, we become greedy. Like, yeah, I just want to see it a third time. It's like, well, no. Sometimes you got to leave some food on the table. Do you know what I mean? Like, you don't want to be there licking the plate, like all nose deep in your plate, do you? It's unedifying. But the last thing I want to say about this card is, and it's a trend we're noticing, that there's a real destruction of value in boxing, isn't there? Where we're just seeing reputations and names just getting shredded on a regular basis to the point where there's almost like no real coming back for them at the level that they were before. I think the only guy who's managed to pull that off is probably Joe Parker, but he's been carefully matched and managed thus far. And so we're seeing this with the Saudi involvement, like it's really just decimating boxing's value. I don't know how you stop it, though. I really don't know how you stop this because, wow. And for what? Because remember, Matchroom, what was it, end of 2023, they made, 10 million profit from boxing? And I know 10 million is a lot of money to guys like us. But in the big scheme of things, like a whole big-ass sport like boxing, and you made 10 million profit. Is this worth it? Is it worth cannibalizing your sport for 10 million profit? And it's probably lower now because, you're seeing stuff like The Ring dominating. So how long is it till The Ring become the promoter? They become the kind of the media partner for the sport, and they become the managers. It's only a matter of time until the brand covers everything. Just wanted to touch on something. When people tell me that Bivol's now undisputed, Dimitri Bivol's not undisputed in my eyes. And here's something that's happened. We're now conflating the lineal champ with undisputed. And for me, undisputed is this. You either won 2 belts and you're fighting another guy who won 2 belts, or you won 1 belt, and you've had to go and fight another guy with another belt, then go and fight a guy with 2 belts. But there has to be this journey where you've gone and got the belts. You can't have just taken the belts. That doesn't make you undisputed, because here's the dispute. Beterbiev beat you before. That's the dispute. Whereas when Beterbiev beat Bivol, there was no dispute at that point because nobody had beaten Beterbiev. That made him undisputed. And he had won the belts incrementally as well. Canelo won the belts incrementally. I don't know if I class Crawford undisputed at 147 because he took 3 belts off one guy. It wasn't like he came with 2 and he fought for 2. 140, he's definitely undisputed. There's no question about that. The same way that Jamel Charlo is undisputed at 154 because he had to go and win the belts. So for me, my test is, did you go and win the belts or did you fight once to get all 4? If you fought once to get all 4, you're not undisputed. You know what I mean? That's just my take on it. But, God, I talked longer than I wanted to. But that would be my take on what happened last Saturday. There's other stuff we can talk about. Maybe that'll be in another episode. But on that note, hope you enjoyed this episode and make sure you take care.